The walls are closing in on Keir Starmer tonight, and what's been revealed could shatter everything you thought you knew about Brexit. While you were sleeping, the Supreme Court just delivered a devastating blow that sent shockwaves through Westminster and exposed a secret deal that was never supposed to see the light of day. This isn't just another political scandal. This is about sovereignty, deception, and a Prime Minister who may have bet everything on a scheme that's now crumbling before our eyes. The United Kingdom is erupting, and by the time you finish watching this, you'll understand why millions are demanding answers. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will leave you questioning everything. The Supreme Court chambers were packed this morning when the verdict came down, and let me tell you, nobody was prepared for what happened next. In a unanimous decision that's being called the most significant constitutional ruling in a generation, the justices tore apart the legal framework of what insiders are now calling the Shadow Brussels Protocol. You heard that right. A secret agreement between Number 10 and European Union officials that was negotiated behind closed doors, away from parliamentary scrutiny, away from public debate, and most disturbingly, away from the very democratic principles this country fought to preserve when it voted for Brexit nearly a decade ago. The details are absolutely staggering. According to court documents that were unsealed just hours ago, senior members of Starmer's government had been in continuous negotiations with EU bureaucrats since last autumn. The objective? To create what they termed a dynamic alignment mechanism that would effectively bind the United Kingdom to evolving EU regulations without requiring further votes in Parliament. Think about that for a moment. The government you elected was crafting a system where unelected officials in Brussels could dictate policy changes that would automatically become law in Britain, and you would have had zero say in the matter. No debates, no votes, no accountability whatsoever. But here's where it gets even more explosive. The Supreme Court didn't just rule against the government on technical grounds. They went nuclear. In a scathing 127-page judgment, the justices declared that the entire negotiation process violated fundamental constitutional principles dating back centuries. They cited the Bill of Rights, parliamentary sovereignty, and even invoked the constitutional crisis of 1688 to make their point crystal clear. This wasn't just illegal, it was, in their words, an attempt to fundamentally alter the constitutional settlement of this nation without proper legislative authority. Those are fighting words from a Supreme Court that rarely speaks in such absolute terms. The reaction has been nothing short of volcanic. Within minutes of the ruling, MPs from across the political spectrum were demanding Starmer's immediate appearance before Parliament. Opposition leader is calling for a vote of no confidence. Former Brexit negotiators are describing this as a betrayal worse than anything they witnessed during the Theresa May era. Social media has absolutely exploded with hashtags like Starmer resign and Brussels betrayal trending at number one across the United Kingdom. Protest groups are already organising demonstrations outside Downing Street for tomorrow, and some are calling for the largest political rally since the Brexit referendum itself. But let's dig deeper into what this Shadow Brussels Protocol actually contained, because the details are genuinely shocking. The leaked documents show that British negotiators had agreed to what they called regulatory convergence across 18 separate policy areas. We're talking about environmental standards, food safety regulations, digital privacy laws, financial services rules, workers' rights, consumer protections, and even aspects of immigration policy. The mechanism was designed to work like this. Whenever the EU updated regulations in these areas, the UK would have a 90-day window to either adopt the changes or face what the document calls significant economic consequences. And those consequences, they included potential tariffs, restricted market access, and the suspension of various cooperation agreements. Now, the government is scrambling to defend itself, but their explanations are falling apart faster than they can issue them. The official line from Downing Street is that these were merely exploratory talks, preliminary discussions that never reached the stage of formal agreement, but the Supreme Court saw through that immediately. The justices pointed to signed memorandums of understanding, detailed implementation timelines, and internal government emails discussing how to present this to the public after it was already locked in. One particularly damning email from a senior civil servant literally says, "We need to ensure this is operational before Parliament realises the full implications. Let that sink in." They knew it was controversial. They knew it would face opposition, so they decided to hide it until it was too late to stop. The constitutional implications are absolutely massive. Legal experts are now debating whether this represents the most serious breach of parliamentary privilege in modern British history. Professor Jonathan Blackwell from Oxford University, a constitutional scholar with 4 decades of experience, said in an interview just an hour ago that what we're witnessing is unprecedented. He explained that while governments have always negotiated treaties and agreements, the fundamental principle has always been that Parliament must ratify anything that binds the UK to international obligations. This shadow protocol attempted to bypass that entirely by creating automatic adoption mechanisms that would trigger without parliamentary input. In his words, this is the stuff constitutional crises are made of. And the timing couldn't be worse for Starmer. His approval ratings were already sliding after a series of domestic policy failures, controversies over donor influence, and growing public frustration with the economy. Now this. Political analysts are suggesting that his premiership may not survive the month. One senior Labour backbencher, speaking on condition of anonymity, told reporters that the mood in the parliamentary party is mutinous. There are whispers of letters going to the 1922 committee, talks of leadership challenges, and a growing sense that Starmer has committed a political sin from which there is no recovery. You cannot promise the British people sovereignty and then secretly negotiate it away. That's the ultimate betrayal. But who else knew about this? That's the question that's now dominating every conversation in Westminster. And the answers are deeply troubling. The Supreme Court judgment included testimony from multiple whistleblowers who came forward during the proceedings, and their accounts paint a picture of a government operation that was deliberately compartmentalised to avoid detection. According to these insiders, only a handful of senior ministers were fully briefed on the shadow protocol. The Foreign Secretary knew, the Chancellor knew, the Cabinet Secretary was apparently coordinating the entire operation, but many other Cabinet members were kept deliberately in the dark, fed partial information, or told that discussions with Brussels were routine post-Brexit housekeeping. One whistleblower, identified in court documents only as Witness J to protect their identity, provided explosive testimony about meetings that took place in a private room at the Treasury. According to this individual, senior EU officials would fly into London discreetly, meetings would be scheduled off the regular government calendar, and detailed minutes were never circulated through normal channels. Instead, notes were kept on personal devices shared through encrypted messaging apps and stored on servers that weren't part of the standard government network. This wasn't just confidentiality, this was operational security designed to prevent discovery. When you operate like that, you know what you're doing is wrong. The European Union side of this story is equally fascinating and troubling. While Brussels has remained officially silent since the Supreme Court ruling, leaked communications from EU officials reveal they were well aware this arrangement was politically sensitive. One document from the European Commission's negotiating team explicitly acknowledges that the UK government had requested these discussions be kept separate from formal Brexit review mechanisms to avoid parliamentary complications. In other words, EU bureaucrats knew they were dealing with a British government that was hiding this from its own democratic institutions, and they went right along with it. So much for the EU's claims about transparency and democratic values. The economic dimensions of this scandal are also becoming clearer, and they're absolutely staggering. According to analysis by independent economists, the shadow protocol would have given the EU significant leverage over British economic policy for years to come. The automatic adoption mechanisms meant that UK businesses would essentially be subject to EU regulatory changes without British policymakers having any input into those changes. Imagine running a British company and discovering that your regulatory environment just shifted because bureaucrats in Brussels made a decision and your own government had no power to push back. That's not partnership. That's subordination. And it's exactly what Brexit was supposed to prevent. Financial markets are already reacting to this chaos. The pound dropped sharply when news of the Supreme Court ruling first broke, though it's since stabilised as traders tried to assess what happens next. But the uncertainty is massive. International investors are watching closely because constitutional instability in a major economy like the United Kingdom has ripple effects across global markets. Some analysts are warning that if this leads to a government collapse or snap election, we could see significant volatility in British assets. Others argue that the market might actually welcome the clarity of removing a government that was operating in such a secretive and unconstitutional manner. Either way, there's economic pain coming. The public response has been absolutely fierce, and it's cutting across traditional political lines in ways that should terrify Downing Street. You've got Brexit supporters who feel utterly betrayed, furious that the victory they won in 2016 was being quietly undone. You've got Remain supporters who are angry that if closer alignment with Europe was going to happen, it should have been debated openly and honestly, rather than smuggled in through secret protocols. You've got people who don't care much about Brexit either way, but are absolutely outraged by the constitutional violations and the sheer arrogance of a government that thought it could operate this way. When you unite all those groups in anger against you, your political career is in serious trouble. Protests are already being organised for tomorrow evening outside Parliament, and the organisers are expecting tens of thousands of people. Social media is absolutely flooded with videos of angry citizens demanding accountability. One video that's gone massively viral shows a former soldier in his military uniform explaining why he's going to the protest. He talks about serving his country, believing in British sovereignty, and feeling personally betrayed by leaders who would negotiate away what he fought to defend. It's powerful stuff, and it's resonating with millions of people who feel exactly the same way. This isn't just a Westminster bubble story. This is hitting ordinary people where they live. The opposition parties are having a field day, naturally, but even they seem somewhat stunned by the scale of this scandal. The Conservative Party leader gave a statement calling this the worst constitutional crisis since the English Civil War, which might be hyperbole, but captures the mood. Liberal Democrat leaders are demanding a full public inquiry with powers to compel testimony under oath. Even smaller parties that usually struggle to get attention are getting airtime because everyone wants to comment on this absolute disaster. And they're all saying the same thing. Starmer must go. This government has lost all legitimacy and there must be accountability for what's happened. Inside Number 10, sources describe absolute panic. Staff are working around the clock trying to formulate a response strategy, but nothing seems to be working. Every statement they release gets torn apart within minutes. Every explanation raises more questions than it answers. The Prime Minister himself has barely been seen since the Supreme Court ruling, leading to speculation about his mental state and whether he's even capable of steering the government through this crisis. One insider described the atmosphere as apocalyptic, with senior advisors openly discussing resignation and trying to distance themselves from decisions they may have supported just days ago. When the rats start leaving the ship, you know it's sinking fast. Let's talk about what happens next, because the constitutional machinery is now grinding into motion and there are several possible paths forward, none of them good for Starmer. First, Parliament reconvenes in emergency session tomorrow and the Prime Minister will face questions from MPs. This won't be normal Prime Minister's questions. This will be a full emergency debate with extended time for scrutiny. Every opposition leader will get their turn to interrogate Starmer about what he knew, when he knew it, who authorised these negotiations and why Parliament was kept in the dark. His answers will be picked apart by constitutional experts in real time. One mistake, one inconsistency, one moment of appearing evasive or dishonest could be the end of him. Then there's the vote of no confidence that's almost certainly coming. Opposition parties have the numbers to call for one, and rumours suggest that enough Labour backbenchers are angry enough to vote against their own Prime Minister. It only takes a relatively small rebellion to bring down a government, and right now the rebellion looks anything but small. If Starmer loses the confidence vote, we're looking at either a rapid attempt to form an alternative government or a general election. Neither scenario is appealing to Labour MPs who might lose their seats, but sometimes principles matter more than political survival. At least we can hope they do. The legal ramifications are also just beginning. Several advocacy groups have announced they're launching additional legal challenges, this time targeting individual ministers and officials who were involved in negotiating the shadow protocol. They're arguing that these individuals may have breached their oaths of office, violated ministerial codes, and potentially even committed criminal offences related to misconduct in public office. Now, whether those charges will stick is debatable, but the threat alone is significant. Nobody wants to be the minister who ends up in court defending secret negotiations that the Supreme Court has already ruled unconstitutional. There's also serious talk of a full public inquiry with statutory powers. This would be similar to the Iraq inquiry or the Leveson inquiry into press standards. A senior judge would be appointed to investigate exactly what happened, who made which decisions, how the shadow protocol was developed, who knew about it, and why normal democratic processes were bypassed. Such inquiries take years and cost millions, but they have the power to compel witnesses, demand documents, and ultimately deliver a definitive account of what went wrong. For those involved, it's a terrifying prospect. Your emails get read in public, your decisions get scrutinised by the best legal minds in the country, your reputation gets shredded if you're found to have acted improperly. International reactions are also rolling in, and they're mixed in ways that tell their own story. The United States has issued a carefully worded statement expressing confidence in British democratic institutions and their ability to resolve constitutional matters, which is diplomatic speak for we're watching this disaster but trying not to take sides. European capitals are remaining mostly quiet, probably because they don't want to be seen as interfering, but also because some of them are quietly embarrassed that their negotiators were involved in something that's now been ruled unconstitutional. Commonwealth nations are watching closely because anything that affects British constitutional principles has implications for their own systems, many of which are based on Westminster models, and the media is having an absolute field day with this story, and it's dominating every front page, every news broadcast, every political podcast, and every social media feed. Investigative journalists are racing to dig up more details, and you can bet that more revelations are coming. Someone always talks. Documents always leak. The full story of the shadow protocol will emerge piece by piece over the coming days and weeks. And each new revelation will likely make things worse for the government. Already we're seeing reports about the cost of these secret negotiations, taxpayer money spent on discreet meetings and private consultants. All of it hidden from public view. The drip, drip, drip of scandal is often more damaging than one big explosion because it keeps the story alive and keeps people angry. What's particularly striking is how this has united people who usually disagree about everything. You've got left-wing campaigners furious about the undemocratic nature of the shadow protocol, standing alongside right-wing Brexiteers who see this as a betrayal of the referendum result. You've got constitutional conservatives who care about parliamentary procedure, making common cause with progressive activists who want more transparency in government. When a scandal is big enough and clear enough, it transcends normal political divisions. And this is definitely one of those moments. The question isn't whether you're left or right. The question is whether you believe in democracy and the rule of law. For Keir Starmer personally, this may well be the end of his political career. He came into office promising integrity, competence, and a return to proper governance after years of chaos. Instead, he's now facing the most serious constitutional crisis in modern British history, accused of exactly the kind of secretive anti-democratic behaviour he once criticised in others. The hypocrisy is staggering. The betrayal is profound, and the political damage may be irreparable. Even if he somehow survives the confidence vote, even if he clings to power for a few more months, his authority is shattered. He cannot govern effectively when his own party doesn't trust him, when Parliament treats him with contempt, and when millions of citizens view him as fundamentally dishonest. The bigger question for Britain is what this means for the country's future relationship with Europe. The shadow protocol is dead. The Supreme Court killed it. But the underlying tensions remain. There are legitimate questions about how Britain and the EU cooperate on issues where alignment makes practical sense. There are economic benefits to regulatory compatibility in certain areas. But after this scandal, any government that tries to pursue closer EU ties will face massive scepticism and intense scrutiny. The trust is gone. The benefit of the doubt no longer exists. Every future negotiation will be examined under a microscope. Every agreement will be questioned. Starmer's reckless actions may have poisoned the well for a generation. And so tonight, as Britain processes the full implications of what's been revealed, as protesters gather, as MPs prepare for battle, as lawyers sharpen their arguments, and as journalists dig for more evidence, one thing is absolutely clear. This is a defining moment in British political history. This is the kind of scandal that gets written about in history books, studied by constitutional scholars, and remembered for decades. The Supreme Court has crushed a secret EU deal. Starmer stands exposed and vulnerable, and the United Kingdom is exploding with rage. What happens next will shape British politics for years to come. The walls are closing in, accountability is coming. And for those who thought they could operate in the shadows, the light has finally been switched on. And what it's revealed is absolutely damning. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and demand the truth, because that's the only way democracy survives. This story is far from over, and the next chapter is being written right now.